learners and viewers, welcome to this session. This session deals with basics of modern economics. This session is part of the course MGPE 006 Gandhi's Economic Thought. I am Dr. J. Uma, working as an assistant professor in the School of Gender and Development Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University. Let us start with introducing this topic. First, economics has emerged as one of the most important social science discipline in modern times. The economics as a discipline, it aims to be a positive science because it wants to collect the data, analyze, and based on the sources, it wants to establish the theoretical framework. It also aims to be normative. So, modern economics seeks to apply scientific method to construct theories about the process involved in economic activities and test them against what actually happens. So, its two central concerns with regard to economics, there are two central concerns, that are the efficient allocation of available resources and the ways of reconciling infinite resources with the virtually infinite desire for goods and services. So, modern economics claim that it tries to be value neutral. So, objective of this unit, before we get into the details about how the economics as a discipline emerged, let us look into the objectives of the unit. This unit would enable our learners and the viewers to understand the evolution of economics as a discipline. It also makes our learners to know the basics of modern economics, and it gives some understanding about some outstanding thinkers in economics. So, economic thought before economics, how the economics thought emerged earlier period of time. The economic thought emerged, understanding the contemporary world begins easy and meaningful when we began from the past. That is very important. When we are trying to look into the how the world operates, how the society is there currently, just we need to understand from the past. In this sense, history of thought in this case, in the case of history of economic thought, would be helpful in understanding the basics of economics as they appear in present. A well known economist, Lionel Robbins, whom we will be referring to elsewhere also, said that contemporary institutions and contemporary thoughts are expressed through with the heritage of the past. It is recommended that whosoever is interested in understanding more about economic thought well up to the beginning of the 20th century should read Robbins' A History of Economic Thought, the LSE lectures, that is the London School of Economics lectures, published by Oxford University Press in 1998. These lectures were delivered in 1980 to 81 at the London School of Economics. If anybody is interested, please do read this Robbins lecture given in the London School of Economics. This was published by the Oxford University Press in 1998. It will give you how economic thought emerged over a period of time in the world. One moral philosophy from Greek scholars that had an element of economic thought in their writings. First one is the whatever the philosophy written by the Greek scholars, there is an element of economic thought in their writings. Secondly, there was an ad hoc pamphlets or monographs written by theologians and officers in government that argued out a particular case. When you look at these theologians and government officers, they observed whatever they observed in the society and wrote. Interestingly, this can be compared with the how Gandhi thought about economics. So, centuries later, even Gandhi also did not write on economics and was not an economist, but he wrote on an issue when he wanted to argue a particular case. There is one more important thing that we need to note it down. Unlike the early pamphlet and monograph written by the theologians and the officers working in the government sector, Gandhi did not write any special pamphlet or monographs. He had mostly produced notes not bigger than 3 pages to make his argument. Like we need to start how the economics thought has emerged. Let us start with Plato and Aristotle. Plato and Aristotle, the two Greek philosophers, our learners, all of you must be read or know about him, whose contribution to early economic thought has got registered. Plato was looking for an ideal state and responsibilities of people. He examined the working of economic relations in the state and compared it with what ought to be. It should be made clear that he was not in favor of democracy. Athens was the center of economic happening during that period, and it was easy for them to command on the working of the economy then. Plato in the detailed discussion ended up giving an idea about division of labor. Aristotle was not looking for an ideal state in the sense in which Plato was. Aristotle's focus was household behavior, and in his context he commented on money and ways of money making from ethical point of view. Interestingly, he approved the system of slavery in the household management. Aristotle thought that people by nature could be divided into two types, one who gave orders and other who took orders. Like Plato and Aristotle, during the Middle Age, scholarships started reappearing and economic issues also got attention. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote Summa Theologica. He considered the economic affairs of exchange and interest as sin. Nevertheless, the major discussion that occupied the debate was about the just price for the commodity that came up for exchange. These debates laid foundation for the labor theory of value. It should be noted that the period was 14th century. What we are talking about, the period of St. Thomas Aquinas, that period was 14th century. There was lot of discussion on money and related matters, and the mercantilist school of thought emerged during that period. It contributed to economic debates. That mercantilist school of thought emerged during 16th and 17th century. With the emergence of the concept of nation state, feeling for own nation became strong and national policies received priorities over the local policies in economic affairs. The core concern for the mercantilist could be summed up in the title of the pamphlet that appeared in 1613 from the prison. It read a brief treatise on the causes which can make gold and silver plentiful in kingdoms where there are no mines. The best contributions came from General Malins, Misselden and Thomas Mun. It is interesting to note that most of the persons who contributed to economic thought were holding some government positions in trade and commerce related work. Malins advocated exchange control because in the absence of control, speculations lead to deviations that made goods artificially dearer or cheaper. Such influctuations were not favorable to the state. Misselden had developed an antithesis to Malins and advocated inflationary environment to stimulate exports. The most important scholar in this school of thought was Thomas Mun. His book England's Treasure by Foreign Trade was recognized as the most important book of mercantilist school. Adam Smith, who is known as the father of economics, considered it as a Bible of mercantilists. Though it may appear that the chief concern of the mercantilist was to make England rich with gold and silver, Mun's writings made it clear that it was all about the terms of trade, especially the factorial terms of trade favoring England. Last in the series of anticipation is Sir William Petty. In a way, he laid the foundation of quantitative economics. He approved of the Francis Bacon's method of scientific research, collecting facts and analyzing them to test hypothesis was the mainstay in that method. His contribution lies in combining the monetary ideas with political arithmetic. He was investigating and estimating the amount of money that was necessary to keep the trade going with full employment and constant prices. His recommendations for taxations came from this basic arithmetic, and thus Petty becomes a very important forerunner of economists who later developed systems. This section ends with mention of Josiah Child and John Locke on the interest rate debate that took place in the later half of the 17th century. The legal interest rate was 6% in the second decade of the 17th century. There was a feeling that it should be reduced, and Josiah Child was influential as the head of the East India Company and argued in favor of reduction in 1668. He referred to past experience and quoted immediate experience of Netherlands that had prospered on account of reducing interest rate. Next is we need to see the classical economics. Cantillon is the first in this series. He was of Irish origin and settled in France. In his book Essay on the Nature of Commerce, published in 1755, he deals with working of the economy in first part, followed by elaborate discussions on the monetary and interest theory. In the third and final part, he describes as banking and commerce, including international trade, in the authoritative way. It may be noted that for the first time an economist described the working of the entire economy. Cantillon was a successful banker who could also describe the working of the economy. A group of people calling themselves as physiocrats was active in France. It was a sect which had regular practices in debating on issues and advocated that agriculture was the main sector in any economy which could generate real value and hence national income. It believed that economy worked in a particular way should be promoted. Dr. Quinsnay, a surgeon turned physician, was the founder who is well known for the tableau économique. He for the first time estimated national income. Of course, there were assumptions. According to physiocrats, agriculture was the only productive sector. Extractive industry was later added to it, but rest all labor was useful but sterile. This work was followed by the work of Turcotte, who wrote reflections on formation and distribution of wealth. It should be clear that by that time economics as a discipline was taking shape in the form of explaining how the economic system worked, how wealth was being created and distributed. Foundations of classical economics was laid with writings on property rights. John Locke and David Hume are beginners in this tradition. The explanation of the systems in which the economic functions were taking place and were explained came to be known as political economy, and the focus on individual enterprise, use of labor for production for the unit of output and returns to the factors of production etc. came to be known as analytical economics. Hume has contributed to both. Classical economics began with Adam Smith, who is referred to as the father of economics. Adam Smith is known for his classic An Inquiry into the Nature and Cause of the Wealth of Nations, written in 1776. The main inquiry by the classical economist was to determine the value of the production and its distribution. Robbins put it differently and said that the book was about theory of productive organization and the theory of causes of economic growth. Robbins put it differently and said that book was about the theory of productive economic organization and theory of causes of economic growth. Smith was interested in theory of value as his predecessors and successors were, and he was also inquiring about distribution. Smith's major focus was on how the country could create wealth and what type of productive organization provided best opportunity for wealth creation. His concept of division of labor, which evolved while writing about the organization of production has become a famous maxim in economics. He said, division of labor is limited by the extent of market. He advocated the production of environment which allowed an individual to pursue an enterprise working on what was best for him and one that would yield maximum returns. He also advocated individual liberty and believed that the economic affairs were to be facilitated under laissez-faire. The state was to play a facilitator role in this process. They are Robin Malthus and David Ricardo. Colonel Roberts was not much remembered and taught in the economic paper in a regular economic courses. Apart from Robert Malthus, David Ricardo, Colonel Robert Torrance, like economist James Mill and his son John Stuart Mill, Nassau Senior, McCulloch and J.E. Kearns. With Malthus, we enter into the 19th century economic thought. Malthus is known for his theory of population growth. He also wrote on principles of economics and got engaged in serious debate with David Ricardo on issues of the day. Malthus believed that population growth was faster than the increase in food production. Power of earth to produce food was limited. He said, quote, population when unchecked increases in a geometrical ratio and subsistence in an arithmetical ratio, unquote. He then wrote the ratios as 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on like that. So, constant additive factors like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 and so on. So, he was aiming to explain the law of diminishing returns in agriculture because land being a constant factor and the labor being the important variable factor applied to it. Malthus wanted to argue that the increase in production would gradually decline. It should be remembered that the law of diminishing return was further polished by another classical economist, mainly by Ricardo, and this is a fundamental contribution of the classical economist to the subject. David Ricardo is the master draftsman of the labor theory of value. It started a backdrop of the Corn Law in England and the thinkers worked on various explanations. Ricardo's labor theory of value, succinctly put in his own words on the principles of political economy and taxation, reads as follows, quote, the exchangeable value of all commodities rises as the difficulties of their production increases. If then new difficulties occur in the production of corn for more labor being necessary, whilst no more labor is required to produce gold, silver, cloth, linen, etc., the exchangeable value of corn will necessarily rise as compared with those things. On the contrary, facilities in the production of corn or any other commodity of whatever kind which shall afford the same produce with less labor will lower its exchangeable value. Close the quote. Ricardo went on constructing the theory of rent and theory of profit from labor theory of value. Ricardian rent is even today an accepted concept for the part of the profit that is made due to advantage over the quality of resource given the same production technology. The labor theory of value had a problem. Even Ricardo understood that in production there was contribution of capital as well. This became more and more important with industrial production, where land formed a very small part of production factor. The acceptance of capital added the problem of distribution in the agenda of economics. James Mill and McCulloch, followers of Ricardo, confronted this issue of capital and treated all of such capital as indirect labor and thus reduced everything to labor. The other contribution of Ricardo was theory of international trade, and it has come to be known as theory of comparative advantage. The last and most discussed of the classical economics was John Stuart Mill. He wrote Principles of Political Economy. Mill approached production and distribution differently. He believed that laws of production had universal applicability, whereas the laws of distribution was guided by the institutional arrangements in each society. Mill was also distinct classical economist because he introduced the concept of static and dynamic in the political economy. Before turning the basics of modern economics, the contribution of Marx needs to be understood. The Marx also focused on the theory of value in volume 1 of Das Kapital. The English translation of the original German work was Capital, a critique of political economy. He also developed the theory of wages. He argued that employers determined the wages as they always had better bargaining power, and they mostly kept the wages at subsistence level and thus generated surplus value. Once the surplus value theory was established, he went on to build the theory of declining profit, theory of growing rate of concentration in manufacturing industry, and there was a theory of economic interpretation of the history, the theory of class war. It is the class war professed by Marx which came to be accepted with great appeal. So, I have completed in this unit till the Marx thought about economics. In the later part of the history, we will discuss in a separate lecture. For this lecture, I have referred these books and web references. Hope our learners, you were able to understand the history of economics. Thank you.